Hey growers, good to see you all again. It's a beautiful spring day, end of March. It was 72 yesterday, in the 50s today. That means that snow is melting here at the castle. We're inside the stone circle, and we have a couple thousand plants going already in the chambers. This also means that next month you're going to be able to plant some of your plants outside. Today we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about one of the favorite garden plants, that being strawberries. Why plant strawberries? Because they're strawberries. Who doesn't love strawberries? They're quite easy to grow. And from another consideration, strawberries are actually on the Dirty Dozen list of the most contaminated fruits you can buy in the grocery store. So it allows you to grow crops that you know what is and isn't on them and in them. Strawberries can be a little confusing for most people, but when we look at them in one or two very simple categories, I think we can clear all of your questions up. First, there are things about all strawberry varieties and types that are the same. We will talk about those, and then we'll talk about how you handle different types of strawberries in your garden. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what you want to plant for a strawberry. You'll go to a garden store or a farm center. You'll look and you'll see different variety names, and one will say June bearer, mid-season bearer, ever bearer, day neutral. Our first thing to do is figure out what these terms mean. There are basically three different types of strawberries. We have June bearing, we have ever bearing, and we have day neutral. A lot of people lump day neutral and ever bearer into the same category, which they shouldn't do. They're actually a little bit different. So first, let's look at June bearing. Their name somewhat implies what they will do. We plant them, and sometime in that June, early July range, they will give usually one big flush of fruit, and then they're pretty much done for the rest of the season. So you can think of June bearing as all coming in over the course of, say, a week or two. They give you a large flush of berries, nice berries. This variety is usually chosen by people who do things like canning and making jams and jellies, because you have all of your fruit in one batch, you process it, you save it. The drawback is that now you don't have strawberries for the rest of the season. We can get around that a little bit by planting different varieties of June bearing. We have June bearing, but within that category of June bearing, we have early season, early mid-season, late mid-season, and late season. Those different varieties will come in about a week after the previous classification. So an early season will come in the earliest, and then about a week later, an early mid-season will come in. About a week after an early mid-season. Week after that, late mid-season, week after that. So you can stretch your harvest out to probably now 5 or 6 week range, but you have to plant multiple varieties. So this is June bearing. You get one big flush. They're great for canning, jams, good berry size, good quality. Some of the very popular varieties are things like Everglow, Cavendish, Jewel is a very popular one. So June bear. Ever bearing, the name would imply that you get strawberries all summer, but in fact, the classification of everbearer generally has a big-ish flush early in the season, and then a second flush later in the season, later summer. And then in between, a few berries. The berries aren't usually as big as the June bearers, but the volume per plant is usually about the same. So everbearers, an early flush, a later flush, berries not as big. An improvement on the everbearers is this new type, relatively new, called day neutral. And with the day neutral, they will basically start to bloom and fruit in that early season and give a steady, continuous fruiting right up until fall. We've had them here, we're picking them during frost. The berries generally aren't as big as June berries, and they're spaced out so that, again, you're not getting this huge flush for making jams and preserves, but you get a steady supply of berries all through the season. So June bearing, if you want big flushes, and I would say go with day neutral if you want a continual supply through the summer. A common question is, how many strawberry plants should I get? This depends on how much you like strawberries. On average, some of the research from agricultural groups has shown that somewhere in that range of 6 or 7 plants per person per season is about average what you'll see for consumption. An average plant, say with a either a June bearer or a day neutral, by the time you've added all of the harvest from that day neutral plant, you'll be generally talking in the range of a quart per plant. So how many plants? 6, 7 range, you're not going to go wrong, per person per season. So now we understand the 3 different types: June bearing, ever bearing, day neutral. I pretty much leave the ever bearer out and make a choice between June bearing and day neutral. So once you've made your decision of what type of strawberry to plant, the next decision you have to really pay attention to is, where in your garden do you plant them, and what do all strawberry plants, no matter which type they are, what do we have to do in general for all strawberries before we start talking about the particulars of June bearing and day neutral. So what do strawberries need? Number 1, full sun, and probably the minimum that you want those plants to get for sunlight during the day is 6 hours. They want to be in full sun. They want to have a soil that is sandy loam, that's rich in organic matter, that is well drained. One thing that no strawberry tolerates well is standing water in saturated soil. So you want to pick a place in the full sun. You want a place that's going to have a sandy, organic, rich soil that you can plant in. Another thing that you want to make sure of is to not plant in a spot where plants that are susceptible to verticillium rot, which is a fungal disease that can devastate strawberry patches. So you don't want to plant in a spot that within the last 3 years has had plants like tomatoes, eggplant, pepper, melons, mint, roses, bush berries like bush fruit like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries. What we want for soil conditions, we would like to have a pH, and this varies a little bit on where you look at your sources. UNH will say 6.2, 6.5 to 6.67 in that range. You probably have a range of anywhere from, say, 5.8 to 6.8. So we want to know that your pH is right. If you don't have a spot that drains well, if you have a spot that gets a lot of sun, you have a fairly sandy loam, but when it rains, the water sits there, your best bet is to grow or to build a raised bed so that now you know that you have the right drainage. So all strawberries want those basic conditions. One thing you've heard me talk about a lot in previous videos, whenever you're going to be planting in your garden, have a soil test done. Because people will ask me, well, what should I add for fertilizer or amendments? And you know what my answer to that is. It depends on what your soil test says. We know that if you don't have enough of the right nutrients, whatever crop you're planting will not produce or grow well. But on the other hand, if you have too much of a particular nutrient, that can be detrimental and actually be as bad as not having enough. So have a soil test done. If you can't or decide not to have a soil test done a rule of thumb when you're prepping your soil is to add 3 or 4 inches of a good, rich, composted organic material, and or scatter some 10-10-10. So amending your soil, be very careful, because one thing about strawberries is, although they like a rich soil, too much of a nutrient profile can reduce berry production, reduce flower and therefore fruit production, quality of the fruit. Too much nitrogen can also cause the production of fruits that are soft and mushy, and a plant that isn't very resistant to bugs and pests. So soil prep, sun, making sure not to plant in an area where you've had plants like tomatoes, eggplant, pepper, melons, and a number of the others. So now we have the variety. You've chosen either June bearing or your day neutral. You've chosen your spot. You've had your soil tested. You've prepped your soil. You've tilled it fairly deeply. And a thing to mention, if you put something like a 10-10-10 on, make sure to work that in with a tiller or turning so that it's worked throughout the soil and doesn't just stay on the top. So work your soil well, and good drainage. We'll talk about it later, but if you're growing in a container, the same thing. You must have drain holes in the container, and you're going to want the same type of conditions in the container grow medium, whether it's soil or grow medium. So now let's look at where we go from having decided the variety or the type that you want and the variety. You've decided where you're going to plant your strawberries. You've gotten your soil prepped. How do we now plant and care for these strawberries? Because we have two vastly different types of strawberry, June bearing and day neutral, let's look at each of those separately and just look at the slight differences in how you plant and how you care for them. Both of them require the exact same environmental conditions and soil conditions. When we look at June bearing, first look at let's first look at how you generally would plant June bearing to get your highest yield. We'll look at exactly how to plant the plant in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is switch over here to the high-tech audio-visual aid and look at a couple of things. So what we're going to do is take a quick look at the preferred system for planting June-bearing strawberries. These are the ones that are going to give you that big one-time flush of strawberries. We're going to use a system called the matted row. This is just a diagram of your garden, a walkway, and then we have a bed on each side of the walkway, or you can have one bed or whatever. The beds are generally about 2 feet wide, and they've been prepped like we talked about before with the addition of organic amendments. You've had your soil test done, you've tilled it deeply, so they're ready to go. With this system, we plant the berry plants right down the middle of the row, spaced about 2 feet apart. So you got plant, 2 feet of plant, 2 feet of plant, 2 feet of plant. This can be 10 plants long, or it can be a mile long. So however long this is just dictated by your garden size. What we do with June bearers, and this is a subject that's hard for most people to comprehend, let alone follow. With June bearing strawberries, if you're going to do it correctly in a perfect world, when you plant them, as soon as they start putting leaves out and put flowers out, you are supposed to pinch off all of the flowers for the entire first season so that you get no production. The reason being, we're trying to divert the energy into the crown and the roots to give the strongest, healthiest plants, and then next season when we let them flower and fruit, they will put out a really massive crop. But pinching all the flowers off is very difficult for most people to do because you won't get any strawberries the first year. The solution to that is plant a bed of everbearers so that you can have some strawberries. Or some people will just plant the June bearers and let them go and pick the strawberries. It's really up to you. Perfect world, you plant them, you pinch all of the flowers for the entire first year. But in addition to the plants putting flowers out, they will also, if you're familiar with strawberries, they will put a runner out with a little baby strawberry plant on the end. They'll put a whole bunch of these out. And those are what we call the mother plant, and the mother plant puts out these little babies on the runners. This is an indicator here. This is the mother plant that you've planted, and then it puts runners out. You can take these runners, and when the runner gets long, set the baby plant onto the ground with the runner still attached. Put a little soil or something on the runner to hold the plant in place, and then that will take root, so that you end up with these little baby plants all over the place, which will turn into mature plants. You just want to make sure these stay about 4, 5, 6 inches apart, but they will completely fill in this row. This is why we get the term a matted row. So remember, June bearer, in a perfect world, we plant the plants you're buying 2 feet apart down the center of the row. We pick all of the flowers off for the first year. We let the runners develop, and we set those so that they completely fill the row in. Next year, this entire row will produce just a massive amount of strawberries. Most of your commercial pick-your-own-grow operations will use this matted row system. So matted row, the preferred system for June bearing strawberries. Let's take a look at day neutral. So with a day neutral system, we've got our 2 rows or 1 row. This is the bed here, this is another bed, walkway. Just as in the matted row, you want to keep them about 2 feet wide. The reason for that is it allows you to be on either side of the bed and reach into the middle without leaning on all the plants. It's a thing of convenience. So this is what we will use for day neutral strawberries. We've prepared the soil the exact same way, but in this system, instead of planting into the flat soil, we actually build a mound. We mound the soil up in the bed so that it's about 8 inches high. It's a mound now, or a hill from the hill system. When we plant the strawberries, we plant them on both sides of the mound. And what we try to do, this is the first plant we plant. We plant the second one, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and everything wants to be about a foot apart. So we've got plants on both sides. It gives them a lot of room. Now remember, with the June bearer, we pinch all the flowers and let the runners grow. With day neutral, we want to get that plant established and give it some extra energy to the crown and roots. So this first year, say you're planting this year, do yourself the favor and pinch the first flowers off until about the 1st of July. That will allow the plant to put its energy into good crown and root production. And then the 1st of July, you let the flowers develop, you let the fruit develop, so you'll have fruit through the summer. So day neutral, pick the flowers until this 1st of July. But in June bearing, we let the runners develop. In day neutral, we want to pinch all of the runners off because we don't want the energy going into the runners. We want the energy going into flower production for this first year. Most people plant day neutral and they treat them as an annual because they're inexpensive. Renovating a bed, and we'll make a video on that at the end of the summer, how you get strawberry beds ready for the winter and for next year. Most people will treat day neutral as an annual. So plant them up, pinch the flowers until the 1st of July, and then let them flower and fruit the rest of the season, so you'll have a good crop that first year. And pinch the runners. Keep that strength going to the plants that you're treating as annuals. So hopefully that has answered these questions about June bearing, day neutral, the type of system that you grow them in. Again, June bearing, plant them, pinch the flowers the first year, and leave the runners. Day neutral, you pinch your flowers until July, and then let them flower and fruit, but pinch all of the runners off so that you keep all that energy in the main plant. So now let's look at the critical point of how do you plant strawberries. Most of you probably will be buying your strawberries at a place like Blue Seal where they have been grown in 6-packs. So you can take the plug out and plant it with relative ease. But a lot of you I know may go into a store and see, geez, here's a bundle of 25 strawberries for the price of a 6-pack. And when you buy those bundles, this is what you're going to see. I'm going to move forward here. You're going to see that you get these individual, these are called bare root stock. Very important that you understand the different parts of a bare root strawberry. Obviously, these are the roots. Don't mistake this. We use the old cardinal rule, green side goes up. We have the roots. Then we have what you will see as the flowers, the leaves coming out. The critical thing to understand here is what we call the crown, and it's this juncture between the roots and the upper part of the strawberry plant. This is where everything happens in a strawberry plant, where all of the tissue makes its genetic choices of producing flowers and fruits, and so this is what we have to take into consideration whenever we plant, and this is called, again, the crown. So let's show you exactly how any strawberry plant, again, June bearer or day neutral, has to be planted. Okay, if you take one thing away from this video, this is going to be it. Planting your strawberry plant correctly. If you don't plant it correctly, you'll either get no harvest or a very low quality harvest. The plant will be stressed, more prone to disease. This is critical. So remember, the crown is at that juncture point between the roots and what you will see with the leaves and the flowers. The correct planting is to have the soil line just at the point a little bit above where the roots meet the crown. So a lot of sites will tell you that you can be right at the juncture or just maybe like a quarter of the way up the crown. That's the correct way in terms of the depth that you plant these. Too deep means that you're too far up the crown. Too much of the crown is below the soil. Too shallow, you've got the crown sticking up and the roots are actually up over the soil line. So very, very critical. When you're planting, be very aware of the soil level being right just above the juncture of the roots and the crown. You want that crown right at that soil level. You do not want the crown below the soil level, and you do not want the crown higher than soil level. So planting correctly, plant them with that crown in the right place. So if we're talking about how to plant these, you get some bare root stock. How the heck do we plant this? You'll notice if you get bare root stock too, you'll have the roots, and then you'll have kind of this woody, sticky stalk. That is the remains of one of the runners from last season that has come up, and this was actually attached to the mother plant. So this is the remains of the stalk that went to the mother plant when we went into the matted row system. You can either plant them just like this. Some people, you know, some sites, even commercial sites, will you know, advise you that you can just take a pair of scissors and whack off about 4 or 5 inches, so that you get 6 or 8 inches above the soil line. And now let's look at how we plant this. When the roots go into the soil, we want a hole deep enough. We do not want the roots doing this. We don't want to dig a shallow hole, lay the roots in a trench, and have your roots like this. We want the roots to be basically straight down. That's how they want to be. It allows them to have a much larger area to absorb water. If we have a trench like this at the top, they're within an inch or two of the top. That soil dries out much more quickly. Strawberries need water, so the deeper the roots can go, the longer that water reservoir exists for them. So I've got a container here, so if I'm planting in a container or in the ground, I'm going to trim these roots, make it a little easier just to show you. So we can take a pair of scissors, shorten the roots up a little bit. I dig a hole straight down. I set the roots in firm. And what we want to see, you can see that the crown is right at soil level. I do not want this to look like this, seeing the roots up, and I do not want to see it like this, buried with the leaves coming up from underground. We want that crown right at the soil line, the bottom of the crown. So that's actually pretty much all you need to know. So when do we water? Strawberries need a lot of water. They really need to stay moist. But on the other hand, we do not want them to be wet and soggy. They will usually require between 1 inch or 2 of water per week. We want to water them, usually we do not want to water them every day, maybe every other day, so that they stay moist again, but not waterlogged. We want to water all season long. Drip irrigation works really well. Most commercial producers will use drip irrigation. When do we fertilize? This is a little bit of an interesting question, because like we discussed, strawberries are very sensitive to over-fertilization. So number one, without knowing, if you don't have a soil test done and we don't know what your nutrient content is, we're taking a little bit of a chance by, at the beginning of the year, adding a lot of fertilizer. So I can't overemphasize, have a soil test done. If you don't have one done and you decide to use something like a 10-10-10, do not overdo it. Do generally stay within that 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet, which would be 1 pound per 100 square feet. 1 pound is not a lot of a 10-10-10, but be pretty precise on that. Too much nitrogen, you're really going to start negatively impacting your berry production. And with June berries, say you decide to establish a matted row, you go through that and you're saying next year we'll have a really good crop. With June berries, you don't want to fertilize at the beginning of the season because you're apt to apply nitrogen. So with June berries, if you've established a matted row, you will actually fertilize late in the summer when we do what we call renovation. We'll make a video on that towards the end of the summer. You'll be fertilize, renovate your bed, and in the spring, you just let them grow, let them fruit, and then you will fertilize after the fruiting. With day neutral, generally you can use the system that we were saying of applying 10-10-10 at that rate of a pound or two per 100 square feet, letting the berries fruit, and then maybe in that July, end of July, middle end of July to August range, giving them a side dress of a 10-10-10 at that, again, at that 1 pound per 100 square feet ratio. And with any strawberries, when you fertilize them, you do not want to get either liquid fertilizer or a granular fertilizer onto the leaves, because they're very sensitive to fertilizer, and when the sun hits them, you can begin a process of what we call phototoxicity, where the sunlight reacts with the strawberry, with the fertilizer, and can actually burn the plants. So it's almost strawberry time. I know that the Blue Seal stores will be getting strawberries in probably about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks maximum. You can start planting them as soon as the ground is dry and workable. Remember the rules that we talked about, and if you have any questions, like always, you can either contact me through the Blue Seal stores or directly through the website link or the email link at the end of the videos. So think spring, it's coming. It's been a long winter for everybody. It's been a long year. We're all looking forward to getting out, getting the plants growing, picking some strawberries. So be good to each other, and remember, you need to know what your plants need to grow.